Hi, this is Amreen from readadayclub, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the Gulag Archipelago by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. Now I am a bit confused because I don't know how to start this video. Honestly, I don't know how to begin talking about this book. I picked it up very randomly after reading Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, and it's one of those very few nonfiction reads that sort of destroys your naive and innocent understanding of the world, of humans, of humanity. For decades, the word Holocaust served as shorthand for modern man's inhumanity to man. Then one lone man added a second such term, Gulag, which now appears in dictionaries as a common noun. So what are we talking about here? The forced labor camps of the Soviet Union. Now, these were known as the Gulag. It's a term that now represents extreme, unimaginable human suffering because of the totalitarian regime of Russia back in the 1930s. So Solzhenitsyn was a prisoner in one of these camps, and in the book he talks about how, just like him, millions of others were unjustly imprisoned, they were tortured and often even killed. So what this book, what it does is it shows you the dangers of absolute unchecked authority, and this was during Joseph Stalin's rule as the communist leader of the Soviet Union. And at the same time, this book also shows you how hopeful and resilient the human spirit can be, because despite it all, despite the imprisonment and the mental and physical torture, Solzhenitsyn managed to reveal all of this to the world. He somehow managed to reveal, that unyielding side of his spirit in the face of oppression, relentless, brutal oppression. And all this is presented without romanticizing pain and suffering, without philosophizing anything, and everything is raw, and that's what I liked the most about his writing. So he starts the book by talking about arrests, how just like him, millions others were arrested, and the emotional impact of something like that. He talks about the inability to act, inability to resist, inability to fight against those arrests. And from the very first chapter itself, Solzhenitsyn has dissected everything. So thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and the whole nature of evil that was the political system of Soviet Russia at the time. So we're talking about millions of people dying under the communist rule. We're talking about millions of Russian peasants, farmers, known as the dispossessed kulaks, how their homes, their farms, and their entire lives were destroyed just because the Russian government decided to pursue their communist ideals. So that means confiscating their land, their livelihood, and all of this obviously resulted in mass displacement, famine, and death. And about their arrests, Solzhenitsyn has written something very moving that I've marked here. He says it was the forced resettlement of a whole people, an ethnic catastrophe. No one fussed about with taking the head of the family first and then working out what to do with the rest of the family. On the contrary, in this wave, they burned out whole nests, whole families from the start, and they watched jealously to be sure that none of the children, 14, 10, even 6 years old, got away. To the last scrapings, all had to go down the same road to the same common destruction. Like raging beasts, abandoning every concept of humanity, abandoning all humane principles. So he says that they got 10 years for what ranked as an especially dangerous theft of socialist property. So this was the farmers taking food from their own farms because they had to feed themselves, they had to feed their own families, they had no other means of doing so. Then Solzhenitsyn writes about the interrogations after those arrests, because they have to charge you with something and you're given no other choice but to accept those false charges. And in this part of the book, actually, he has described every possible method of, he says, let's try to list some of the simplest methods which break the will and the character of the prisoner without leaving marks on his body. So he talks about the psychological methods of torture. He talks about the actual physical he talks about actual physical torture, and this goes on for quite a few pages, unfortunately. And he's written about the blue caps. So about the blue caps, now these were the officers who carried out the inhumane acts, their duties. So about them, Solzhenitsyn gets into the deep-seated psychological aspect of such people. He explains why and how they were driven by such strong instincts, the greed for power, and how that can be really intoxicating to the point of destruction, literally. Their branch of service does not require them to be educated people of broad culture and broad views, and they are not. Their branch of service does not require them to think logically, and they do not. Their branch of service requires only that they carry out orders exactly and be impervious to suffering. And this is what they do and what they are. We who have passed through their hands feel suffocated when we think of that legion, which is stripped bare of universal human ideals. So that was part 1 of the book. Part 2 is all about how the archipelago was built, how it functioned. Part 3, they're the destructive labor camps, which was the rise of the archipelago and how it metastasized. And to understand this part of the book, all you have to do is read chapter 5 of part 3, just that chapter. It's called What the Archipelago Stands On. And I really like the way he's started this chapter. He says that just as every point is formed by the intersection of at least 2 lines, every event is formed in the same way by the intersection of at least 2 necessities. So for Russia, these 2 necessities at the time were their economic need, the economic requirements, which led to the system of camps, which gave rise to all the labor armies. And that intersected with the theoretical justification for the camps. So he says that the economic need manifested itself, as always, openly and greedily, for the state which had decided to strengthen itself in a very short period of time, and for which it did not require anything from outside. So it got all the manpower for free without having to build housing, schools, hospitals, and it was possible to obtain such manpower only by swallowing up one's own sons. Then in part 4, the soul and barbed wire, that's when Solzhenitsyn starts to talk about the ascent. This is the part where you read about hope, where you read about that invincible, I don't know if invincible is the right word here, but whatever that feeling inside that, that gave the prisoners the will to continue the struggle. I guess it could be called that feeling of universal innocence. Solzhenitsyn mentions it in the book as well. And when you read this book, you understand what hard labor means, you understand what exile means. And I still remember the words that Solzhenitsyn uses to describe the life of exile. He says, emptiness, hopelessness, a life that is no life at all. And the purpose of all this hard labor, the purpose of all this suffering, it was all for economic gain, and it was done very economically as well, unfortunately. But towards the end of the book, Solzhenitsyn has, just like at the start of the book, there's a chapter on arrest. Towards the end of the book, there's a chapter on release. So he's written, in all other respects, release is arrest all over again. The same sort of punishing transition from state to state, shattering your breast, the structure of your life and your ideas, and promising nothing in return. So for some, release meant freedom, and for some, prison was their spiritual birthplace, like a secret part of their soul would always remain there forever. And in the end, Solzhenitsyn has written, I am proud to belong to this mighty race. We were not a race, but they made us one. They forged bonds between us, which we, in our timid and uncertain twilight, where every man is afraid of every other, could never have forged for ourselves. To be honest, it was very heartbreaking to read this book, but it was also eye-opening because it shows you unfiltered what humanity is capable of, and that's always disturbing, because when we have we have rational mental faculties to rely on, we still choose to do evil. And Hannah Arendt has talked about the banality of evil, the nature of evil, in her book Eichmann in Jerusalem, which I read right before reading the Gulag. So yeah, on that note, I think I'll end the video. I hope you found the video interesting. I hope that you read this book, obviously, if you haven't already. It's one of those non-fiction books that you must read. So let me know what you think. Au revoir.